Good evening from me, Nthakoana Ngatane, and welcome to Inside Eyewitness News on 702 and Cape Talk. We look at the week that was and the week ahead. It's brought to you by your trusted EWN news team. In this second hour, we normally have a roundtable discussion, and this week we look at the social consequences of unemployed youth. But more importantly, we ask, how do we diffuse the ticking time bomb that is youth unemployment? Now, you heard earlier, if you were with us, that my colleague Kaylin Palmer reported about the labor force statistics that were released this week, painting a confusing picture. But one thing remains clear, that youth unemployment is staggering. Now, my guests on this roundtable tonight are National Youth Development Agency's CEO Waseem Carrim, Dr. Tashmia Ismail-Saville. She is the CEO of the Youth Employment Service, YES, and Danita Hingston from think tank Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Now, I don't know if statistics are enough to talk about this conversation, but let's start with you, Waseem. The NYDA, what role is it playing in this space?
Yeah, thank you so much. Good evening, and good evening to the guests and to all of the listeners as well. So if we look at the history of the NYDA, or maybe the history of youth development in a democratic South Africa, we had two primary institutions before the NYDA which were responsible for youth development. The Umsumbumfu Youth Fund, which was a government business enterprise, mainly responsible for implementation of youth programs. And then you had the National Youth Commission, which was a lobby and advocacy policy-making agency located in the presidency. Around 2009, 2010, the decision was taken to merge the two institutions into one and to form the National Youth Development Agency. Now, I think many of us on this call and listeners as well will know that the NYDA got off to a really rocky start. And that baggage has not necessarily been shed over the years that it's been in existence. And a lot of the last few years has just been focused on rebuilding the credibility of the institution. But if you look at the NYDA Act, which establishes us as an agency, it reflects on many things. So we are a policy-making agency, we are a coordination agency across national, provincial, local government. We're an implementation agency as well. So the agency is really forced to be a jack of all trades and sometimes a master of none. And it often falls to different leaders in the organization or different boards in the organization to define what is its existence. Yeah, and I think a big part of what has been doing in the sixth administration is to say, what role do all of these organizations play in youth development? Does youth development cut across all government? Do we need a coordinator for all of these programs? Yeah, and I mean, the NYDA largely has just been an implementation agency that's never really been able to define its role as kind of this coordinator of youth development in South Africa. So maybe just that as a little bit of introduction into what the agency is in the context of the wider government.
I'll tell you what, when you talk about coordination, this is one of the issues that came up in many of the conversations that we have where government is playing a leading role. The problem is always coordination, because you have all of these bodies, but nobody knows, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. Now, let me bring in Dr. Ismail-Saville. Dr. CEO of the Youth Employment Service. Tell us about yourselves.
Hi, yes, Youth Employment Service, also known as YES, which is a good name because we need lots of people to say yes to get the employment issues sorted out. We are an operational body. We work between business, government, and labor in order to drive the creation of one-year work experiences, largely for Black youth across the country. The Youth Employment Service engaged in our early days with the DTIC and various government departments to push through a policy change on the codes of good practice. So it's a lovely operation that makes the best of both worlds. So we work with government on policy, and we work with the private sector to pay the youth salaries and create these new job opportunities for young people. by doing this, by getting this policy amendment through and constantly working with the DTIC that have been quite innovative, I must say, and flexible in working with us. It's a creative way of using a carrot rather than a stick to try to drive the private sector to invest in youth jobs. And we've been, I believe, pretty successful to date. We've now got, on Monday, my team are committing to 40,000 work opportunities, and this is in about a period of 20 months. And this has happened in a really stiff economic environment where creating new employment opportunities it has been really difficult. And this it's not a small number. This translates into 2.16 billion in youth salaries going into market. So in the early days, very concerned with getting this policy amendment through, and in the last 20 months, just operationally pushing to get these youth into these work opportunities across the country.
Now, Danita, let me bring you on, because I think when we look at the numbers from Stats SA, they tell us that between the ages of 15 and 34, there are about 20 million South Africans, and you are a think tank, and I suppose you have your finger on the pulse. Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, what are you doing?
All right, well, good evening, and good evening to the viewers. Well, we work primarily in research as well as advocacy. Just a sec, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So we do research and advocacy. Our research dimension is we work with academic institutions as well as government institutions in developing policy briefs and a research paper on how poverty and inequality is impacting the livelihoods of millions of South Africans, especially the youth. And then the advocacy part is working with community members on the ground, young people, local councillors, like how are they being impacted by unemployment? And, we give them that space to connect with government and participate, in like budget advocacy work and tell their stories. Recently, we have a quarterly magazine called Spy Talk, and we carried out interviews with various community members. And with the young people, one of the, their cries was that, there are people just lying around or chilling around the neighborhood and they don't have much to do, and they resort to things like, selling cigarettes when it was prohibited, and, finding various, unfavorable ways to make money because there are no opportunities and government aren't giving them a chance to make, use their skills. It's not that they don't have skills. We talked to a young girl who is qualified to be a community health worker, and she informed me that, oh, I could have used my skill during this pandemic, but no one is employing community health workers. Yeah. So these are the things we bring the issues of the community to the policymakers.
Now, Danita, there was a time when education was the issue, where we could say that because young people, many of them are not educated, that's why they're not getting employed. But you have a lot of young people who are graduating from tertiary institutions and, as you say, are unable to get work. So how do we then ensure that we don't find ourselves, as we say, in a situation where young people, for instance, some of them will say that I don't even have money to go and look for that job. So how do we then ensure that at least they're able to find a way to, either start a business or look for a job? How do we bridge that gap?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. We need to dismantle the barriers. Even applying for a government position like an internship, you need to fill in the Z53 form and then take it to the post office and post it. And sometimes it doesn't even get to the right hands. So why can't a person go online, fill out an application, or even have meetings online, Zoom? It's clearly worked during this pandemic. Zoom, MS Teams, Skype, have interviews there instead of having people, take 2 to 3 transportation just to go for an interview, and even the information in terms of like the job opportunities available. Sometimes, many young people come out of university and they're like, okay, I've got a teaching degree or I've got an accounting degree. This is the path I must take. And then you find out that, it's limitless, the kind of things that you can do. Perhaps you can go into private tutoring if you have a teaching degree. You don't necessarily have to wait and be employed by a school. Or even if you have skills while you are still looking for a job, if you can sew or bake or even clean tackies. I know someone who has like a tacky washer, that's what she calls it, business, where she's washing tackies, and now she's developed it into an actual business. So there are things people can do, but they need to be provided with the information, and the bureaucracy in terms of applying for a business or applying for a job needs to be done away with.
Now, let me look at one of the messages that we've seen come through now. Says, even if we could wave a magic wand and provide free quality education to everyone tomorrow, it's too late for the majority of the population who were left behind by the third industrial revolution. Poverty and inequality can only be addressed by implementing a universal basic income grant. Waseem, is this true?
Yes, I mean, a lot of the debate in the last few years, particularly in Europe, is focused on a universal basic income. And I mean, the way it's conceptualized internationally is kind of a cross-the-board payment funded by the state to every household. Yeah, we've gone some way by implementing the social COVID grant in possibly a basic income. Although if one compares, I mean, our basic income is $15 a month. That's the wage rate per hour in the United States. I'm not sure 350 Rand can sustain a household in any event. We've always had this debate about South Africa has a really strong social grant system. Yeah, and we've been able to protect 18 million people, and it's not poverty alleviation, it's poverty management. But we've been able, and I know you speak about the ticking time bomb. Part of why I think the time bomb hasn't exploded is because we have a good social protection system in South Africa. My view is that a basic income solves maybe some of our problems, but not all of our problems. Yeah. So here's the issue. You've got all of these young people in South Africa, and they're willing and they're able to work. I think we must dispel the narrative that young South Africans are entitled or they're lazy and they don't want to work. The majority of young South Africans want an opportunity to be able to showcase their skills. Yeah? And if we think of all of us in this room or in part of this conversation tonight, there's something beyond monetary gain that we do work for, right? Work helps us achieve our purpose in life. It gives us something to wake up to every day that makes us feel hopeful, about the future. And we've literally robbed so many young people of that opportunity, that dignity associated with having a job. Yeah, and that's why I think that something better than universal basic income for South Africa would be something on the basis of an employment guarantee for young South Africa. Yeah? When we speak about an employment guarantee, it says that the state acts almost as an employer of last resort. Yeah, to say, as a state, we guarantee young people a minimum amount of hours of work a week, and not just work to push paper or whatever, meaningful work that can benefit society, social employment, to create the kind of pathway. Because once you're in work, once you're able to network, once you have income in a household, even though it might be low income, it gives you a pathway into economic emancipation. And that's why I think the debate about the low universal basic income, maybe I'll be controversial, but I think the debate is slightly lazy in nature. And I think we can think a little bit beyond the UBI. And in my viewpoint, providing work for the common good is a better solution, especially for young people.
Yeah, well, when we talk about sectors that young people should be getting into that can absorb them probably even quickly, whether as business people or employed, what sectors are those? Yes, I mean, the issue will always be that can government fund these kind of proposals? I mean, government is already so overstretched in terms of its budget. I mean, we're talking about austerity
post-COVID-19, you know, cutting the budget deficit and that kind of thing there. But, you know, if I just think about South Africa and I think about the amount of work that needs to be done. So I look outside, right? I mean, we all know the basic education system, right? We invest so much in basic education for so little return out there. And I'm sure, again, I'm sorry to keep bringing the people in this room, but I'm sure all of us know how much value after-school programs played in our life as young people, whether it be sports, whether it be arts, whether it be debate, drama, yeah? And if you think about that, those after-school programs have largely gone away, particularly in public schools, yeah? And if you were to create a framework where you had young people working for other young people, right? So young people could earn a wage in a public school to run after-school programs or to be teachers' assistants, yeah? That is already a sector where we could create so many opportunities. I agree, it is not real economic opportunities. It is not the market creating opportunities, but at least it provides a buffer, right? Because I think if we want to sit and wait for systematic or structural changes for the economy to grow, young people simply don't have that time. And we're going to lose an entire generation of young people to high levels of unemployment.
Dr. Saville, when we look at what Carrim is talking about in terms of the skills that young people have versus where the economy is going. I mean, we've had many times the president and the presidency talk about infrastructure development, and we've seen countries like Germany, for instance, that have prioritized technical skills and technical education. Is that playing a role, and is there something that can be done?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things we do is we talk about the unemployed like they're some kind of monolith. You know, that there's one type of unemployed youth, and we have young people that have matric certificates, we have young people with tertiary qualifications, and then actually the largest number of unemployed youth out there have dropped out of high school. Some of the stats we have, about 54% entering the labor force don't even have a matric certificate. So yeah, for young people who don't have any currency in market to, you know, a qualification to show what they're capable of, we really need for them to be given opportunities in small businesses who are far more likely to absorb youth with lower skill sets. We've got to start in the schooling system where we have youth that aren't going to be who are put off by this very academic track. I know that Department of Education is experimenting with certain schools where they're making vocational tracks available in the school. I know at our hub in the Western Cape, I spoke to a secondary school teacher, a woodwork teacher, who said to me, when kids finish at school with his class, they can go out and actually start making things. At the time that I spoke to him, they were busy making beautiful wooden butcher's blocks. You know, very sellable, getting the types of skills that they can start a small business quite quickly. And even where you have youth that might not have the academic skills to get into university, you know, they can start with this type of vocational and entrepreneurial skill from the schooling system. And then we've got to go even further back to understand why so many young people are dropping out in high school. Yeah. And there's some interesting research that the switch from mother tongue to English leaves some young people behind. So there's some interesting work being done at the moment. Nick Spall is one of the players in this. He does a lot of fabulous research on youth employment and education. And they're doing a trial with unemployed youth getting trained as teachers' assistants with a really beautiful program. So you're killing two birds with one stone. You're supporting no-fee schools with really large class sizes, so those young kids don't get left behind in primary school, which should reduce high school dropout. So, I mean, there's a lot that we need to do. Some of it is systemic and goes all the way back into the primary school system. Some of it can be done with youth who are already, as Waseem's describing, you know, they're sitting in this lost middle space between not getting into varsity and not finishing school. And for those youth, these types of guaranteed employment schemes would be fantastic. But ideally, you want to start getting down into the structural and systemic issues, which is teaching entrepreneurship earlier, really making a lot of vocational tracks easier for youth to enter into. I think we've got a stat with the Swiss that something like 70% of them don't go to university. And this is a country with one of the highest GDP per capita in the world. And most people actually pursue vocational tracks. And they're seen as aspirational jobs. If you're a baker or a patissier, give it a fancy name if you want. These are seen as craftspeople. Not just a baker or a chocolate maker. And so I think we've got to do a lot in terms of marketing these types of jobs and making them more aspirational for young people. So there's not one answer. It depends which group of youth you're talking about and where in the system you want to do the intervention. It's an and.
Now, Danita, in your work, is there an appetite with young people to take up vocational training, technical training, and to not necessarily have a law degree and be a doctor, or some other career that needs one to wear a suit and tie and go to an office? Is there an appetite for that type of work and training and skills among young people?
Yes, most definitely. In our research, there was this young man and he was telling me, you know what, like, I can't put myself in a box. I'm a man of many talents. During COVID-19, he even found a new business pathway in terms of delivering water to local community members, because of water shortages. And, people are actually finding gaps and, assisting even with NGOs. Perhaps it's not bringing in an income, but as Waseem was saying earlier, working gives you a sense of purpose, a sense of dignity. So delivering food to the elderly in the community. So there are young people out there who want to do something. And even another young person in our research was informing me that, in as much as the grants are available, but I have like dreams for my life. I don't want to depend on the government. I would rather get an income or do something with my life, even if it's just working in a warehouse or using my hands. I'm willing, I'm able-bodied, and I can do the job instead of, standing in the queue the whole day, waiting for the grants that's not going to take me far. And, just to add on, the grants, I'm not discrediting it. It does something, you can go to the shops and purchase something. But let's say if you're a hairdresser, that 350, you take about 3 to 4 clients in a day. You make that you make more than 350 in one day. Yeah. And now imagine how much you'll make in a month or in a week. So, things like that, skills like that shouldn't be, overlooked, because it can actually sustain you and your family for the month.
You're listening to Inside EWN. We're talking youth unemployment. How do we defuse the ticking time bomb? Remember that you can talk to us on 011-883-0702, or if you're in Cape Town, call us on 021-446-0567. You can also SMS us on 31702 or 31567. On Twitter, we're at Inside EWN, and email inside@ewn.co.za. And I'm going to take a few Facebook comments because we're broadcasting live there if you want to see us also. And Temba Foster Mabuso says, take out all the Madalas and Magogos. It's time for new blood. You all have apartheid minds. It's done and dusted, and we need new ideas now, just like technology. It upgrades. IT upgrades now and again, away with your thinking methods. And I want to put this to Waseem. Now, Waseem, young people probably see the NYDA as one of those organizations that are probably not accessible to them. Let me give you an example. During the elections in 2019, when we went to places like Qwaqwa, this is a place in the Free State, in the Eastern Free State, where there is even a college in that area. But the young people who are going to that college are all aspiring to move out of that beautiful part of the country that boasts tourism and can boast agriculture, to come to Johannesburg and probably go to Cape Town. How do we make sure that they see the value in the land that they're in and probably agriculture?
Yeah, I mean it's a really interesting debate, you know, and I'm not a migration expert, but I assume the flow of people into the Western Cape in particular and Gauteng is due to economic reasons, right? So if you live in a rural part of the Eastern Cape or KwaZulu-Natal, the ability to find work is much lower than what you would be able to do in Gauteng or in the Western Cape. Yeah, I think agriculture is spoken about in often terms. I mean, the NYDA runs a micro grant enterprise system, and the amount of applications we get for agriculture is overwhelming, right? I mean, the last 3 to 5 years has really seen a fundamental shift in that kind of thinking that agriculture is not for me. You know, I mean, you can go out almost on a weekly basis. You would not struggle to find wonderful articles. I think there's a new page called Food for Insanity. There are wonderful articles on young people in the agricultural space. Yeah.
How much of the work that you do with young people is in the agriculture space, Waseem?
So for example, just to give you on a micro enterprise grant system where we fund about over 1,500 businesses a year, 12 to 13% is in agriculture. I compare that with 5 years ago, which 2-3% of young people applying for ideas in the agriculture space, you know. So there's really, I wouldn't say the willingness doesn't exist, right? It's about also getting the ecosystem right. So agriculture is not about only funding a business, yeah? It's also about making land available so that young people have sufficient agriculture. It's about ensuring that water is available to the area so that you know, the hydration part of it is sorted out. Yeah, it's about ensuring young people or agriculture business has access to market. Yeah, and these are kind of structural issues that many role players in the system need to work with. But I think there's a lot of great work that's going on in the sector. I wouldn't say that the willingness doesn't exist. I truly do believe it exists in the agricultural sector, just like it exists in many other sectors. Yeah, it's about getting all of these factors working in cohesion with one another. I do want to make this point though, is to say, I'm wary sometimes of pushing young people into an entrepreneurship space, which they either don't want to do or they're not ready to do. Yeah.
But I mean, there are those who want to get into the entrepreneurship
100%,
space.
and those young people must be supported. Where you have a passion for being an entrepreneur, the onus falls on the sector to be able to support you in achieving your dreams, because passion is what drives entrepreneurs. My point though is that 80% of young people that we speak to want to be able to find a job in the labor market. Is it really fair? And I'm happy to pose this question to the conversation, is to say, is it really fair to tell a young person who wants a job, go and be an entrepreneur? Because I also think that entrepreneurs are molded by doing work, right? I think working in a business gives you the kind of skills that our education system is not producing to be able to be an entrepreneur one day, right? Working in a business gives you a much better chance of running your own business one day. Yeah? And I think that's an important question that we sometimes need to answer. I don't think necessarily this notion that entrepreneurship is going to solve all of our problems necessarily exists. Yeah.
It's not to say that it's going to solve all of the problems, Waseem, but if I give you an example, there are young people, for instance, who say that I am from Soweto, I am from Tembisa, I'm from Kailicha, and I want to start a business. When I go to a bank as a new entrepreneur, the first thing they want from me are financials. And one of the young people was saying, do you, as probably the NYDA, do you even know how much it costs to do financials? So I think the question that I'm really asking is, for those who really want to get, whether it's in agriculture or other sectors, those who want to get into entrepreneurship, isn't there still a mismatch? What are you doing about that gap?
Yeah, so I mean, a big part of our work over the last 10 years has been youth entrepreneurship. And I want to say that the NYDA functions in a very niche kind of space, in that we have a bias towards emerging and startup township and rural enterprises. Yeah? So those young people who would not qualify for funding anywhere else. Yeah. And then I mean, the energies that we've seen are massive, right? And I mean, I I don't disagree with your point that the NYDA may be inaccessible in rural areas, right? We certainly may be so, yeah. But my point is that we've invested a lot in that space, and if I look at demand for our services, so I, for example, said we fund about 1,500 businesses a year. Demand for those products is about 8,000 to 9,000 young people applying, right? And I would say probably 4,000 to 5,000 of those applications qualify for funding, you know, and are unable to access that funding that exists here. So certainly there's no shortage of demand out there, right? I think the sector, financial services sector, if we speak about it a little bit, I mean, it is a big concern, right? So let's look at the COVID-19 bank or loan guarantee process. Till today, it remains a heavily contentious issue, right? Government makes through liquidity processes 200 billion available, only 14 billion is taken up. Yeah? The banks say they don't have enough applications to be able to approve. People who are applying say that the bank's criteria is too stringent. Yeah, we've got something called the Financial Services Sector Code in South Africa. And how do we use that code, or how do we amend those policies to be able to extend more kind of this microfinance? I mean, our telecoms providers in South Africa are huge. I see MTN is venturing into that space now to give micro lending. I think in Kenya we've seen the mobile money kind of space as well, and I think those are opportunities to be unlocked. I don't personally believe government has all of the money, although it does have some resources available. I think maybe my last point is to say you're always working in a risky space, not only in South Africa but globally. The global stat is 50 to 70% of startups fail. Yeah? And therefore, sometimes it's a hard sell to say, let's put a lot of money in entrepreneurship. Sometimes people would much prefer to put money into learnership programs, internship programs, bursary programs, because the value at the other end of it is easy to see compared to the entrepreneurship space where you often have a very high degree of failure.
I'm going to come back and talk about entrepreneurship, but I have a caller on the line. Sheldon in Cape Town. You want to talk about the steel industry?
Yes, thank you. Basically, what I want to get across is I'm a business owner in Cape Town, South Africa, obviously. And I've got 26 staff members employed by us. And being in the steel industry, it's compulsory to belong to the bargaining council. Now, when you belong to the bargaining council, your minimum wage differs to the national minimum wage. So, for example, if I have to get someone in to sweep right at the bottom or be a storeman in my workplace, they need to start at basically 50 Rand an hour. Now, if you take the unemployment in the country and you look at it as a whole, the only thing that's going to solve unemployment is small businesses. Our corporates are not going to be able to create all the jobs, the work out there to fill that gap. So the problem is, as a small business owner, you're always at risk at taking someone with no experience, which you would love to take on and learn, but you can't start teaching at 50 Rand an hour. It's someone that's earning 8,000 Rand a month and he's absolutely comes in there with zero skills. So if that bargaining council rate was not there, you could have got them in at a lower rate, taken on more of them, and you can then teach the skill from the beginning. But you can't at the moment because there's just too much risk involved, first of all, because you've got to cover that cost. And secondly, as well, with the importing duties and stuff like that, in the steel industry, we can never, ever export, because after we've bought the material with a high labor rate, which the bargaining council has placed, we can't export our product either. So I think the main thing is to learn the skills. They need to get into the market. But with the bargaining council being there, it's very difficult to get into the steel market.
But I mean, surely there is a reason why we have things like minimum wage, Sheldon. People cannot be exploited just so that many of them can be, employed.
100%. But what I'm saying is, in the steel industry, our minimum wage is different to anyone else's minimum wage. Our minimum wage is 50 Rand an hour. What national minimum wage at the moment? I think it's almost half of that.
It's 20 Rand an hour.
To get into the steel industry, they can't. We have to take on someone with zero skill and pay them 50 Rand an hour. That's 450 Rand a day. A security guard that needs a driver's license a gun license, and he gets minimum wage is about 4,000 rand a month. How do you justify that?
Tashmia, you're agreeing with Sheldon?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we've seen a lot of data on this. Bargaining councils really create rules for businesses to abide by in a sector, but those rules are decided by, you know, labor and big business that can afford those sorts of costs. And these bargaining council rules then apply to all of the smaller businesses who are also sitting in that sector, who certainly can't compete with big business wages and training programs and you know, the legions of legal support that those businesses have. And you know, when Waseem was talking about entrepreneurship and small businesses, the policy in this area really has to become a lot more flexible and a lot less bureaucratic. You know, we've just seen some really nice research. It was in Business Day this week, where they did some tests looking at spaza shops and their ability to access COVID grants to keep them going. And, you know, very few of them were successful in accessing those grants because of the hoops placed in the system that make it very difficult for small businesses to operate on every front, from the bureaucracy, company registration front, in terms of how they access capital, labor laws, and then of course these bargaining council rules that really are unfair. So I understand the caller in Cape Town's issue is, you know, you want to take on lower skilled workers to do some of the more entry level jobs, and you are saddled with the same thing. The steel industry also governs in automotive. So big international players like VW, you're expected to pay wage rates in tandem with them. Now this idea of making some rules more lax for small businesses, we've got to say to our financial services companies, and I think Waseem's point is very valid, we've got to take that financial sector charter and start to do something quite innovative with it. And say to the banks, you know, if you've got younger entrepreneurs, you've got to have a higher risk appetite. You've got to give them lower interest rates. You've got to allow them more flexible repayment terms. You also can't just give people money. Can we give them entrepreneurial skills, psychological skills around entrepreneurship are actually shown to be as powerful as technical skills and capital in the survival of those businesses. So I do think there's a lot of bolder policy and a lot more innovation and creativity that'll help younger people, because they do have high failure rates. They don't have the experience. And so entrepreneurship has to be a lot more guided and couched when you're looking at younger people, because the survival rates of entrepreneurs who are older is much higher.
Danita, what are some of the challenges? I mean, I mentioned one being that when young people go to financial institutions like banks to try and get start-up loans to start up businesses, especially those who want to go into entrepreneurship, because obviously we have to separate the two. There are those who want to be employed, but there are those who want to start businesses. What are some of the challenges that they come across?
Yeah, I mean, you know, entrepreneurship, as much as it's a good route to take, but I think sometimes we do glamorize it, and not everybody wants to, you know, risk it, because first of all, like, your income is not guaranteed immediately. You know, many entrepreneurs, they work late hours, they work for months before they start getting an income. There are no holidays, no days off, you know, unlike a job, you know, okay, a public holiday is off, I can take leave, you know, my day is structured, a 9 to 5, and usually you leave the work at the office and come home. When you are investing in a business, there's no structure unless you make your own. Usually you leave you have to sacrifice personal relationships, friendship, because all your energy is going into that. And I think, you know, the young people need to be aware of, like, these are the things that I have to take on when I become an entrepreneur. You know, it's nice to have that hustle and grind culture, but when you actually live it, it's completely different, knowing that you have to make all these sacrifices and you're not even seeing any returns for a very long period. So I think, you know, people need to be aware of these things before they get into it.
Right. I have an SMS from one of our listeners who says, and this is to the NYDA, there's a fund where youth entrepreneurs were supposed to receive 50,000 Rand from the NYDA. Even after completing the application and following up, I suspect that the fund has been captured. Why have we had little to nothing about that money? And that is Lerato from Alberton. Waseem?
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks to Lerato. What I'll do is I'll just post my email address in the chat, and the producers are welcome to post it or convey my details back to Lerato, and she can get in touch with us, and we can certainly help her with sorting out that issue. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And then we have another SMS saying all the jobs are given to foreigners by companies. The reason is cheap labor. They say South Africans are expensive. Why I say this, Primrose, many illegal youth foreigners are working in companies, whereas our youth are not working. Check, most trolley pushers in the streets are South Africans, and that is Pasha. Tashmia?
Look, you know, you want to be able to attract skilled people into your country. So I do get a little nervous when conversations go to foreigners are evil and they take our jobs. It feels very Trumpian, you know, and when you look at the evidence of migrant groups, economic migrants across the world, they bring a lot of dynamism and skills into a space. Having said that, I think the problem in South Africa is not foreign workers. I think it's that it's uncontrolled. I think this is what frustrates people, is there isn't a clear system of merit on who we let in and why we let them in. And I think this is really deeply frustrating for people, but this is, you know, an issue at our borders and an issue around policy and an issue around how Home Affairs operates. It's more a state capability and capacity issue than I think it is a foreign worker issue. If we start to show people that there's a fair way of letting people into the country, that they're not buying their way in, and that we're attracting and allowing in people who can add to our economy and help grow and build it with skills they bring in, I think we'll start to see a very different attitude towards foreigners.
Right. Now, I want to go back to the issue again of the skills. The skills development levy, do we have the capability to implement it? Waseem?
Wow, a loaded question if there ever was one. Yeah. So the skills development levy is probably one of the most progressive taxation systems we've introduced in South Africa, right? So let's just think about what it is. You take a percentage of most medium or bigger companies' payroll and you add it into a skills development fund. That fund is linked to business. So you have a sector education training authority linked to almost every major sector in South Africa, from energy to chemicals to mining to financial services. And that fund is supposed to train primarily young people through learnerships, through internships, through skills development programs, work with industry and transition young people. I mean, in a perfect world, it's one of the most amazing systems you can come up with. Yeah. And probably the question we'll come back to is this question we always come back to, is what is the capability of the state to actually administer these kind of funds? Because if in ideation and if in conceptualization these things make sense, we've done them, you know, we've got the tax, we've collected the money, how come it's not delivering the results on the other end? And I think if you look at the history of the SETA, too many of them have been plagued by mismanagement, too many have been plagued by infighting, too many leadership changes all over the place to actually have a fundamental impact over the longer term. Some of the SETAs that have worked, to take Facet, for example, the financial services one, has massively transitioned young people in the chartered accountant stream, in the actuarial science stream, and has made the financial services industry a little bit more inclusive. Yeah. So where we have good management of those funds, the levy in itself is a great policy idea, and it can contribute fundamentally to South Africa's needs. Yeah. And I think that's the reason why the SETAs were extended for another 10-year period. Yeah. But we have to look after those funds better. We have to be more innovative in the way we spend the money, so that we get more bang for our buck. Yeah.
Tashmia?
Yeah.
Do we have the capacity?
I don't believe we have the capacity currently. I think that if you've got people administering funds that are there for training, you really need to have specialists in training that are managing those funds. If you take a look at, we talk a lot about a 4IR revolution, and that this can democratize access to learning if you make it digitally available for young people. But the SETAs have been incredibly slow to understand and embrace and pay for online learning programs, or companies that have been quite front foot and innovative about creating curricula that youth can access online. Now, if you can't get accreditation for a course, a company can't claim the training on that course. And so there's one of those snags that Waseem was referring to around, can we manage the funds? This is, I believe, one of the areas where we can do a lot better in having people who are a lot more open-minded in looking at new ways of learning, new delivery mechanisms for learning, and giving accreditation to those. The way the system currently works is that if you want to change your material, if you want to change more than 20% of the material in a course, you actually have to reapply for that accreditation, which is really expensive and time-consuming. And these are for-profit entities working in the space. So if you tell a for-profit entity, listen, reapply if you're going to change your material and make it more relevant, they're not going to do it. And so you end up with a lot of courses that are extremely expensive, very paper-based in delivery, with learning hours that need to be, signed off. So there's reams of administration that sit with it. Makes it difficult to implement in a quality style, and a lot of the curricula are very dated and haven't been updated to really reflect what the business place needs, what business owners are saying they need youth to have skills in. And we see a similar thing in the TVET space. I think there are some TVETs that are really improving the quality, but there's a huge disconnect between what industry needs and wants in terms of trained youth and what is coming out of some of these institutions and learnership programs.
Again, I have to go back to when you look at industry-wise, which ones have actually taken it up and which ones are finding it easy to actually implement it? And which ones aren't?
You're saying the skills development levy?
Yes.
Look, I mean, we see learnerships. Waseem, you can help out here, but I mean, I've seen it across the board. We've seen learnerships in most sectors, some more successfully delivered than others. So I know MERSETA and FACET, as Waseem has said, have had some great programs and great industry take-up. They work very closely. If you look at BankSETA also, you see that they work very closely with the banks in creating programs that the banks are actually saying we need. So there are some sectors where it's working better. I wouldn't say there's sectors that haven't taken it up, but certainly FACET, BankSETA, we've seen some nice results coming out of those partnerships between business and the SETA that represents them.
And we're going to round up, Tashmia. Let me start with you. If you were president for a day and you had a magic wand, what would you do?
I would put a sense of commitment to country first and the common good into everybody's hearts, particularly in government and the civil service, the people who are delivering to our children as teachers, the people who are delivering to society as police officers, the people who are delivering at home affairs. I wish such a wand existed. But I think if we could work together, if we could have a sense of a common good, I think South Africans are just psychologically exhausted from people not putting citizens first.
And it's scary if you think about, as we say, the ticking time bomb, because we've looked at other areas of the world where disgruntled young people have actually caused mayhem, isn't it?
Our youth unemployment rate is double Tunisia's before the Arab Spring. Yeah. And, Waseem's talked about the social grant. It helps quell people's fire. But really, the time bomb has exploded. We talk about a ticking time bomb. We're looking at provincial expanded unemployment rates of over 58%.
Yeah.
The time bomb has exploded. If you look at gender-based violence, if you look at what young township women have to endure in terms of violence and just a society that is really dysfunctional around them. If you're escaping this, you're the privileged in this country. For most people, this explosion is around them all day, every day. But if we work together, we see so many pockets of where we can do things well.
Danita, president for a day, what would you change?
I would address inequality, because I feel that there's enough to go around for everyone. I mean, it's shocking that just a small percentage of South Africa's population consumes so much, and people have so much wealth, and then there are people with little or nothing. So for me, I would distribute the wealth and ensure that everyone gets what they need and can live a life of dignity.
Waseem, president for a day with a magic wand?
So, two things. Bill Gates once had this dream to say, put a desktop computer in every home. Yeah? And largely in the developed world, that's been addressed. If you look at South Africa, we have 80% of households which have access to a television, but only 20% have access to a desktop computer. Let's put an internet connection, a good internet connection in every vulnerable and marginalized household. That alone, just access to information, will change the dynamic for so many marginalized people and young people in this country. Two, I strongly believe that an employment guarantee, where the right to work is enshrined in South African law and is a viable mechanism to address the 8 million young people we have not in employment or education or trade. Thanks.
Thank you very much. National Youth Development Agency CEO Waseem Carrim, Dr. Tashmia Ismail-Saville, CEO of the Youth Employment Service, and Danita Hingston from think tank Studies in Poverty and Inequality. We're talking about youth unemployment. How do we diffuse the ticking time bomb? Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and all your calls and SMSs coming through. And we are back again next week, Sunday, 7 to 9, Inside Eyewitness News, bringing you the news of the week and the week ahead. I'm Nthakoana Ngatane.